Matthew Huber is professor geologie aan de Syracuse Universiteit in New York. In 2022 publiceerde hij een verhelderend boek over de klimaatcrisis met als klinkende titel Climate Change as Class Wall. Het verscheen vorige week in het Nederlands, in een Nederlandse vertaling, waar ik onder meer mijn medewerking aan verleende, bij de uitgeverij EPO als Klimaatverandering als klassenoorlog. Bij ons zit de auteur, professor Matt Huber, Matt voor de vrienden. Welcome, Professor Huber. Can I call you Matt?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
In your book, you touch many a sore point. Let's go through a few of them. The working class, not only in the United States but all over the world, has to struggle for access to energy, food, housing and transportation. According to you, these necessities are but the very base of the core industries that have to be decarbonized.
Right.
But worldwide capitalism has created markets for these essential needs, which means the lust for profit dominates and steers everything. Also the climate crisis. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, so it's true that the capitalists control over those key resources, not all of which are fully commodified or controlled by capitalists. For instance, housing is provisioned for some under public pretenses, but generally, yes, it is a problem. But the idea is that the climate crisis, if we agree it is a major crisis, it actually creates a political opportunity to make a case and build a political movement that actually starts to struggle over, decommodifying some basic needs, which has been a demand of working class and socialist movements throughout history. You might take something like healthcare and think it's obvious or natural that it's decommodified and provisioned as a right in most sane and civilized countries, but in my country, it's not, right? It is subject to that profiteering you mentioned, and that makes it very difficult for people in the United States to access healthcare. But it doesn't need to be that way. We have a huge movement that's trying to decommodify healthcare and make healthcare a human right. So the idea is that as the climate crisis worsens, as we sort of recognize that actually, the very sectors we need to transform and decarbonize are also very basic needs for everyday people. You would hope there can be a movement, and I would suggest a working class movement that's calling for, if not decommodification, at least public provision of some of these key resources, all the while we're transforming them to decarbonize them. And obviously that's a long way away from where we are today, but that's why we say that this crisis is not getting better. We're not solving it. We're kind of losing in the battle to solve this crisis. Mm-hmm. And the problem we diagnose is that the capitalists are in control of the sectors that we need to transform, and they're very unwilling to transform those sectors, particularly because it's not seen as particularly profitable for them. So it is going to be a struggle to kind of wrestle control over those sectors away from those capitalists and try to provision them otherwise.
One of the main subjects you tackle in your book is that, in fact, the market dominates everything. Mm-hmm. And in general, people tend to forget that and tend to think it's in the consummation that the problem lies. Now, you tackle that problem very deeply in your book. Could you comment a bit further on that specific topic?
The consumption, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
Versus the production.
Right.
And where exactly does it go wrong?
So I think we've been trained to sort of ideologically to think about our contribution to climate change purely in terms of what we do as consumers. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole set of tools you can, British Petroleum actually invented a concept called a carbon footprint. It's gone elsewhere since then. But the idea is that all the things you are consuming are linked to either directly or indirectly emissions that are happening, and therefore you can calculate what your carbon footprint is. this leads to a very individualistic, consumer-oriented way of thinking about climate responsibility. To me, it ignores the fact that a lot of these commodities that we're consuming are linked to systems of production. And whereas consumers are only consuming commodities to just get by in their lives and provision their needs, however extravagant those needs might be, the people provisioning the consumption are actually trying to make money, and they're profiting, and they're actually benefiting, I would say, even more substantially because they're making all the money. And so the idea is that we actually need to think about, in terms of also power, who has the power to transform these energy infrastructures and these systems that we need to transform for climate change. Is it dispersed, isolated, atomized consumers, or is it the people that actually control those sectors in the production of that energy for profit? And so one thing I've even noticed is that even on the left, even the socialist left, is a lot of the left who want to talk about class and climate change often only talk about, it's a problem of class in terms of rich consumers, right? It's like the rich are, eating too much meat. They buy private jets. And it's true, they do a lot of obnoxious stuff as consumers, but that erases and invisibilizes their role as owners and profiteers in the realm of production, or whatever realm. You could be a finance capitalist and have your money sloshing around in many different, very emitting sectors of the economy, and you could also be a vegetarian and take public transit, be a very good climate consumer on the consumption end, but be this sort of very destructive climate capitalist in terms of your role as an owner and investor. And so just from a movement and strategy perspective, I think who's most responsible for the climate crisis is actually the people making profit off of the things that are causing it. So we want to target those people that own and profit from the problem. And I think it might not make that politics easier because those people are very powerful, and it's going to take a lot of movement pressure to, again, wrestle control from them. But I think it's a simpler politics than just saying we're all responsible and sort of dispersing responsibility into this sort of individualistic, moralistic kind of like you need to do your part by performing this sort of low carbon virtue. That I think annoys a lot of people and is not very good at building solidarity, building a mass movement, building politics. And is I think not really going to succeed. So being more simple, like these capitalists are the ones that are destroying the climate. It's not just capitalism, but capital in terms of like the drive for profit that's what's really destroying the climate, and we need to unite everyone to take on them, and that I think is a simpler politics that more people can get behind.
Okay, if you want to unite people, you think in the first place about the working class.
Yes.
What you propose in your book is that we should concentrate on the electricity sector because we can't attack them all at the same time. We should concentrate on the electricity sector, and within the electricity sector, mainly on the trade unions. And what would you say about that?
If anything, I think the book is maybe a bit too narrowly focused on those unions, because the more I've thought about it since the book was published, it's actually, I would say, a broader suite of industrial unions that are really going to be the workers that build the new energy system, the new energy. And it's not just electricity is at the core of it, right? We have to clean up electricity and electrify a lot of stuff. But it's vast, and really, like what we call building trades and construction workers and people working in steel and chemicals, like all these very industrial workers, those are going to be the workers at the center of this massive like civilizational transformation. And so, but I do think like having the electricity workers is a very strategic node in the sort of union landscape. Another thing I've thought about lately, though, is that, I know I kind of try to say we want to be pragmatic and focus because it's going to be hard, but actually I actually think more and more that we really need like a especially in the United States, not like a union militancy in one specific sector, but we just need to revive the labor movement in general, and we need a fighting labor movement. And you know, seeing things like Sean Fain and the UAW, where they've actually brought back the strike weapon as a tool that workers can use to build their power, like that activity I think is more important than anything that would even take place in the electric sector in particular, because that's what we need. We need a kind of fighting labor movement that wields power. And then I think if that were to be built and expanded, I think the climate issue is really going to be solved in a much broader kind of labor politics that would not just be about climate, would be about largely a kind of anti-austerity politics that's calling for massive investment in public goods and public infrastructure and things like healthcare, but also things that relate to the climate, like housing and energy and transport and electricity, right? And so I think it has to be folded into this larger anti-capitalist or anti-austerity movement to, again, you know, not only take control away from capitalists from some of these sectors, but also just do basic stuff like tax the rich at much higher levels and enact large-scale redistribution to fund a more robust public sector. And I think, again, we've been in decades of kind of neoliberal austerity, and we're kind of like, we just are not clear on how we can reverse that. But in history, the only kind of source in society that's been able to build the kind of power and leverage to really you know, take control over parts of the social surplus in a way that we would need to solve climate change. To me, that's the labor movement and working class organization that historically has demonstrated that. It's been defeated for quite some time, but I don't see a lot of other options in capitalism in terms of building up that level of power.
What makes the union movement in the United States rather weak at this moment, although there are some signs of revival?
Well, I think there is kind of a long, well, obviously there was just a devastating coordinated political assault on the unions, you know, Reagan firing all the striking air traffic controllers, and then really I would say a huge kind of, you know, policy of political economic shift that really led to changes that really deindustrialized a lot of the manufacturing and really weakened the unions, and essentially since that time workers and unions have been too fearful, rightfully so. They've been fearful about striking, about leveraging their power in that way, and so that I think has really stamped out the militancy. And then as that happens, a lot of people sort of don't understand what the unions are doing for them. And ultimately, the U.S. has a big problem of kind of a culture of individualism and atomization that I think plays into a kind of hostility towards the inherent collective organization of unions, which, you know, we've always had that culture, and unions were still able to build a certain amount of power in the middle of the 20th century. But as the sort of coordinated political attack on the unions took place, I think that culture kind of helped again isolate, and Americans live in very spread out, sort of suburban type of isolated lives with cars and stuff, and I think that is a big part of demobilizing working class power. But in that process, people have lost a lot, and people are struggling a lot. So you have to hope that at a certain point they might try to organize and fight back, and that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah. Let's hope so. Yes. A last question, because you're American and we are Europeans. We are concerned about the elections.
Yeah.
So what is your prognosis, and will it be catastrophic in both cases?
Well, I'm not really like a huge fan of the Democratic Party and what they've been doing, but I would clearly say it would be a lot better if they would win. Yeah. Donald Trump is very dangerous, and it would be, I think, a catastrophe if he were to be elected, although I think there's certain style in America of liberalism that kind of over catastrophe. Like, I think the cries of like we're gonna basically go straight into fascism once he's elected, I think is a bit overdoing it. We had him as president for 4 years. It was really bad, but I wouldn't call it, like the, Third Reich or something.
Yeah, of course.
But there's some sense that it will be worse the second time, and I could see that, but it wasn't as catastrophic as some want to make it out to be. And I actually have written that from a climate perspective, we'll see. I think there's obviously forces in the Republican Party that want to repeal a lot of what the Biden administration has done on the Inflation Reduction Act. One fear I have is a lot of the investments in the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill and even the CHIPS Act, a lot of this stuff is actually still very much in motion and hasn't hit the ground yet in terms of actually opening factory gates and huge investments coming to fruition. So one fear I have is that once those things start opening, Donald Trump would love to because that was his whole platform, was we're going to build infrastructure, we're going to bring back jobs to Americans, we're going to open factories in the Midwest and other deindustrialized, abandoned places. And he is, as a despicable a person he is, he's also somewhat savvy politically, and I could see him, why don't we hold rallies and ribbon cutting ceremonies with all these Biden investments and just stamp the MAGA label on them and be able to take a lot of the credit for the jobs and the reinvigoration of those communities that come along. So we'll see. What's clear also is that a lot of these investments haven't hit the ground yet. Most people in America, the polls show, aren't even aware about these policies. Something like 60-70% haven't even heard of the Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah. So it's not clear these investments are really working very well for Biden right now. So the real danger would be that they'll work past 2025 as a sort of way of branding a revived MAGA Trump movement. So.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much.